It's time. It's time to talk about Spider-Man No Way Home. I've given everyone, I think, a fair chance to see it now. I didn't want to be the person who spoiled it for anyone. There will be spoilers throughout this video. There's nothing to give it away in the thumbnail. It has been 4 days. So all of us enthusiasts who need a chance to go see the film, we have, and now we can nerd out together and we can talk about it. Now, this isn't going to be a movie review. If you know me and know how I work, you know that I'm all about relationships. If you're new here, welcome. If you're a regular here, welcome back. So what we're going to do is we're going to decode Peter's relationships in Spider-Man No Way Home. We're going to talk about 4 things. We're going to talk about the relationship he has with himself, and massive spoiler, we know there's a very specific experience he has when he meets other versions of himself. I'm nerding out so much on both the fan service of that and also what it means in terms of the quantum, and there's some legit stuff in there where you can actually get to know yourself at a deeper level, because what they showed looked like it was science fiction, but actually there is something in there for you. So we'll get to that. We're also going to look at his relationship with MJ, his relationship with Doctor Strange, and his relationship with Aunt May. So if none of those relationships interest you, this probably isn't the video for you. So there we go. Interestingly enough, this may or may not be interesting. Maybe it isn't. Look what I was using to prop up my laptop before. I took one book out because I thought, oh, it's a bit high, like it's risen a bit high. It's Parker's Astrology. You couldn't make it up, could you? You couldn't make it up. So let's talk about the relationship he has with himself. So this is a really specific experience he has. Can you imagine if you were someone who was bitten by a genetically modified spider, and that's an oddly specific experience, and then you were given all these powers and you had this experience that felt really isolating, and then you met people who'd had the same experience. Not just they had the same experience, but they were you in another reality, in another dimension, in another universe. Can you imagine how that would feel? Can you imagine if you were able to have that opportunity? If you were presented with that opportunity to meet other iterations of yourself from another timeline, dimension, reality, and universe, would you take it? I would. I think it'd be fascinating. Would you take it? And if you would, what would you want to ask them? How would you want to connect with them? What would you want to discuss? And how would that feel? How would that feel? Do you think that would give you more empathy for yourself and your experiences? Do you think that could help you be a better version of yourself because you have information from another you who's had the same experiences, right? But maybe their experiences have been in a slightly different context. So fascinating, such a fascinating concept. Now, while you may not be able to do the portal thing, and by the way, how exciting was that in the cinema to see that? Oh my gosh, my only regret is that I wish people weren't quite so English, because I went to see Spider-Man on Wednesday at 10:30 in the morning, and you would think, even though it was early, it was opening day, you would think people would be excited that the cinema was deathly quiet. Now, I've got a big mouth and I'm also half Canadian, which means I've got a bit of the North American flavour. I was clapping and cheering until I realised other people weren't. And I thought, I don't want to be that person that spoils it for anyone. And so I went quieter. But there was not a lot of cheering. And I've seen the reaction videos online from different cinemas, and I wish people were less British sometimes. I was like, oh my God, can you believe what's happening? It's Andrew Garfield and it's fucking Tobey Maguire. My brain is going to explode. Anyway. So even though you may not be able to like conjure a portal and another version of you walks through, you can connect with different versions of yourself, a future version of yourself who has information that you need access to. And there's lots of ways you can do that. I have a meditation on it. I'll link it up above. How wild would that be? Just think about that for a second. Just think about if that was you and what you would do with that information. And if it's something you don't want, I'm interested about why that might be. Why would you not want access to that? Is there something that might feel scary in there or might just freak you out? I'd love to hear your perspective on it. So let me know in the comments down below. Let's look at his relationship with MJ. From what I can see, it's a very beautiful, healthy relationship. There's a lot of trust and mutual understanding and support. They look at each other with complete, unconditional, positive regard. And yeah, they're young, but it's a good, solid, healthy relationship. There's nothing in there that flagged for me. I just thought these are two kids in love. Like, I hope they, I hope this works out for them, and I hope it continues to be beautiful, Now the ending, the part where Peter decides to kind of sacrifice himself and ultimately make it so that all these people do not know who he is, that works in a film. It doesn't work in reality, right? And I know we're dealing with the intangible and the esoteric and the supernatural and all of that. So it's not like we would ever be in a position to cast a spell and so that everyone forgets us. But this idea of self-sacrifice, this idea of love being self-sacrifice, be really, really careful in taking that on as your reality and your belief, because that can really, really anchor in some very unhealthy dynamics in your partnerships if you think that you have to completely sacrifice yourself for love. So let's just appreciate that for what it is, which is a movie trope that is so well done and had us all crying like a baby when we were watching it. I cried so much in this film. Let me know if you did as well. I found it very emotional, very, very touching and beautiful at the end. And in reality, we don't have to sacrifice ourselves, right? We don't. What I did think was really beautiful and very healthy, actually, is the coffee shop scene at the end. And I feel like I'm going to cry talking about this. It was so beautiful. Where he goes in, he's got this letter because he's going to remind her. And instead, he decides, actually, I think this is going to frighten her. I think this is going to really freak her out. So I'm going to put her first. And I'm just going to let it be. And for me, that felt really pure, really deep, really beautiful. And that felt a lot closer to what love is in real life as opposed to this movie love that we see, right? And I know that because of how it feels. I know that because when I was watching it, I was like, God, that's so beautiful that he chose to drop his agenda, to let go of his need to control the situation and to just say his version of, in the words of Loki, I just want you to be okay. There's something about that was so beautiful. And then he looked over at Ned, who'd got into MIT, and he was just so happy for them. And that just felt really unconditional and really beautiful. And then, of course, we see the final scene, which I was doing the ugly cry at this point in the cinema. And he's got the coffee cup. He keeps that memento of their first interaction. And he goes off to, swing and fight crime. I thought that was really beautifully done. Amazing, amazing writing throughout the whole film, but that was particularly beautiful and selfless in a way that felt healthy and not self-sacrificial, Let's look at his relationship with Doctor Strange. Now, a lot of people see this as him being a bit of a father figure. I don't see that at all, actually. I don't see that. I always saw Tony Stark as being a bit more of a father figure to him. We'll get to Tony Stark in a second. We'll get there. But the reason I don't see Doctor Strange as a father figure is he, from a psychology point of view, there's a model called transactional analysis. Now, big, long, fancy word. Basically, there's 3 different ego states. One of those ego states is the critical parent. So when an adult is in that mode of critical parent, it can put someone in the position of child, of adaptive child. And I see that happening a lot with Strange and with Peter. Sometimes it's a bit more like a mentorship, but it's a bit dysfunctional for me. He's not super encouraging. He doesn't really accept who he is. And they have really opposing views on some really fundamental topics, such as empathy and compassion and mercy, which seems quite fundamental to who Peter is. And while we're not talking today about Peter's relationship with his adversaries, with his foes, with these villains, it is quite clear that he has a lot of heart and a lot of compassion. And he says we can't just send them back to die. And Stephen Strange is very much of the mindset of that's their destiny. It's kind of how it is. Oh well, send them back. An argument could be made that maybe he should have done that, because if he had done that, his aunt would still be here, right? So again, with this pattern of self-sacrifice, but he did what he felt was the right thing. He didn't want to send these people to die. He wanted to help them. And that says so much about who he is. That seems to me very consistent with the characterization through all the different universes, through Tobey Maguire's version, which I saw in the cinema 20 years ago. Yes, I am that old. And Andrew Garfield's version, which, by the way, Andrew Garfield's iteration of Spider-Man for me is the most heartfelt and the most emotional. Not that the other two are not, but there's something about him that really makes me cry, that really makes me feel, that makes me laugh. particularly in Spider-Man No Way Home. He's the one who really, anytime he was on screen, I just couldn't look away, and he felt very, very. His grief was palpable, and he's such a phenomenal actor. You know, he really stole the scene, I thought, in many different sequences. There's also that scene where they're all talking to each other, and there's that scene of I can't remember what number they give to each other, but Tom Holland and Tobey Maguire talking to Andrew Garfield, Spider-Man, and Andrew Garfield's basically saying, "I'm kind of lame, like I don't have, haven't done the cool things that you guys have done." They're like, "No, you're amazing." The Amazing Spider-Man, a pun, of course. But is this, for me, it was just the personification of the way that we speak to ourselves. And they talked about, self-talk and self-belief and his self-image, and how that's maybe something that he needs to work on. So that seemed to really personify different versions of himself. I thought that was really, really well done. But yeah, Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man for me has a really core emotion, an emotional center that is palpable and that I really feel and believe and root for. And then, of course, there was the moment where he saves MJ, which I was floods of tears at that point, and it's just such a beautiful moment that he got that redemption, and we all knew he was going to, and was so, so glad that he did. So going back to Strange, though, Peter does have all the different iterations of Peter. They all have a really beautiful heart energy. Tobey Maguire's Peter, I could feel his empathy and compassion radiating onto the screen when he came through the portal, when he walked through, and the grandma, Ned's grandma, is like really affected by him, and he just has this beautiful compassion and open heart. So we know that this emotion is something that runs through the thread of all of them, no matter which actor has brought him to the screen. So the reason that's important to know is because Doctor Strange doesn't have that. Stephen Strange was a surgeon. We all know this. He was a very gifted surgeon. There are certain professions that don't allow for an enormous amount of empathy. There are certain professions where empathy is not a thing that is useful. In fact, it can be a detriment. They are often careers such as being a CEO, being a surgeon, being in the military, being a pilot, I can talk from my experience, being in the media or being in PR. Those careers tend to attract those people who very rarely have a lot of empathy, often have narcissism or antisocial or some kind of cluster B personality situation. I would say the narcissism in Strange is pretty high. I would say the narcissism in Tony Stark's high also. That's another topic for another time. But the reason that means he's not a great father figure for Peter is because an empathetic child needs a compassionate father figure, and we don't get that from Strange. Now, it makes for a great on-screen pairing. It's interesting to watch them, but in reality, that child would not be getting his needs met, especially if this is a child who's not had a traditional family, who's not had a mum and dad really. He's had his auntie, he's had his uncle, but they've died and it's been a whole thing. He's had a very traumatic life, as most of the MCU have. We know phase 4 is about trauma and therapy and all of this. But because he's had that, the reparative relationships he needs to be in are ones where he has a lot of empathy and compassion and support, I would say, from a psychological, emotional point of view. So that's why I don't see Strange as being a particularly great father figure for him. Maybe a good mentor, but not a father figure. What else do I want to say about that? I think that's about it. So let's move on to his relationship with Aunt May. This is the final relationship that we're going to analyse. So I do see her as being a motherly figure, and here's why. She has the archetypal motherly traits that a child or a young person really, really needs. And we can only imagine, we can only guess that that's how she's been when she's been raising him. She's very empathetic, she's very warm, she's very caring, she's very compassionate, very nurturing. So she is the archetypal mother. So when she dies, it's the death of the mother figure for him, and it's devastating. And I don't think I've ever seen such a moving death in the MCU, apart from maybe when Loki dies. That might just be me personally, though, finding that really distressing. But there have been many deaths that have been very hard, probably Wanda and Vision as well. That was a very difficult thing to witness. But that death scene, how much time they spent over it, how you saw Peter not accepting it and wanting her to respond and kind of knowing what happened but not admitting it to himself. I found it absolutely, it ripped my heart out of my chest. It was so devastating, and Tom Holland's acting was incredible, and I felt so deeply for him in that moment. You don't have to work in psychology or relationships to know how deeply traumatizing that is as a person, for a person. And he has this unique situation now where after that happened, he went to his safe place, his place on the roof, and the other Spider-Man and his friends found him. And they all have that common pattern of having a place they go, the Chrysler Building, the Empire State. I thought that was such a beautiful moment where they were able to exchange that with each other. Oh, this is where I used to sit to clear my head. It was really touching and really sweet. So they went to find him and be with him and, hold him emotionally. It was really, really beautiful. But now he has this unique situation where he has Andrew Garfield and Tobey Maguire saying to him, he says, don't tell me you know how I feel. And they said, well, actually, we do. And he's able to hear how he could become really rageful or really bitter, because these other two versions of himself went through a very similar trauma. And so he's able to see that mirrored to him. And again, I'd ask you that question. If you were able to talk to another version of you who'd been through something, what would they say to you, and how would that shape and change the way that you make decisions and the judgment calls that you make? Would it help you get through a difficult situation faster because you're able to see how another version of you navigated that? I think that's a really fascinating concept to think about. So he has a choice now of who he becomes. He has the choice of who he becomes, and he wants to avenge her death. And what happens at the end with Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man is just so touching, and so poetic and beautiful. And he doesn't let him do the thing that he did. He doesn't let him kill the bad guy. Yeah, it was a lot. I'm excited to see the film again. I'll take tissues this time because I know I'm going to cry again. And I'll do another video. Where we go deeper with this. This was just an overview. This was just a brief rundown of some of the patterns I saw with the relationship he has with himself, with MJ, with Strange, and with Aunt May, which seems like the most significant relationships in the film. Maybe I could talk about the relationship he has with grief, the relationship he has with fame, the relationship he has with his adversaries. Maybe I'll do a deep dive on one of the relationships he has and really go deep into that and analyze it, not just for this film, but then expand it out into the other places that we've seen him have a relationship with that person, whether that's with MJ or Strange or Tony Stark or whoever it might be, even though Tony Stark wasn't in this film. What do you think? What did you think of this film? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Was it worth the hype? I have to say, I was worried the first half an hour, 45 minutes, because it was kind of slow going. And I'm like, Marvel, if you have hyped this up and it turns out to be another DC Comics Suicide Squad situation, I will never forgive you. I had some serious trust issues after that, let me tell you. It was that movie was hyped for 2 years. Do you know how disappointed everyone was when they saw it? Awful, terrible. The whole thing was like a montage, and this is why I jumped ship to Marvel. I was like, I can't do it anymore, DC. I just can't stand the pain. And here we are in Marvel Phase 4, which is very painful. But for me, it absolutely lived up to the hype. It was one of the best films I've seen in the MCU, and I've seen a shitload. And it was so well done from a relational perspective as well. So this is not the last time I'll talk about this. I will be doing another video on this when I've seen the movie the second time and the third time. I'll go and see it a couple more times for sure. Let me know if there's something in particular you want me to analyze about Peter's psychology, about his relationships, about what he's been through. I'd be happy to dive in and include it on a future video. I was going to say, if you haven't seen the film, go and see it already, but you wouldn't have watched this otherwise because there's spoilers. So, yeah. Are you going to see it a second and third time? Let me know. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.